Fed up with little SUVs that talk the talk but can't walk the walk? Here's one you'll like, Suzuki's Jimny, an ultra-compact 4x4 with genuine character. This 4th generation version, like its predecessors, uses a proper ladder frame chassis and delivers proper off-road ability. Just don't expect it to be cultured on tarmac. Built for Ben Nevis, bought in Belgravia. As an extra car for the wilds at weekends, we think it'd be just about perfect.
Suzuki has long had a mission to create the one and only small, lightweight four-wheel drive vehicle. It's called the Jimny, there's nothing quite like it, and this is the 4th generation version. New Jimnys don't come around very often. The version prior to this 4th generation one was on sale for 2 decades, which is perhaps why this model line has such a cult following. It's one of those utilitarian SUV icons like the Land Rover Defender, the Jeep Wrangler and the Mercedes G-Wagen. And just as those cars have in recent times been painstakingly updated in a way that retains their essential character, Suzuki has laboured long and hard to ensure that this modern era Jimny model line continues to be true to the values that it was originally born to serve. The Jimny story dates back to the late 60s and a product called the Hope Star OM360, manufactured by the Hope Motor Company. It was essentially a kind of scaled down World War II Willys Jeep. Suzuki bought the rights to make this little 4x4, updated it and then relaunched it in April 1970, badged as its LJ series. 11 years later, with 250,000 worldwide sales on the board, the company replaced that car with a model that you're more likely to remember, the SJ series, which in the 80s gained unwanted notoriety for its alarming tendency to tip over when cornering at speed. Nevertheless, nearly 1.7 million SJs had been sold by 1998, the year that this current car's predecessor was launched. That 3rd generation design was the first in the model line to be generally known in our market by the Jimny name, and it was a far more civilised thing than its predecessors, or at least it seemed that way at launch. As the years passed though, the Jimny looked more and more at odds with the kind of cultured little runabout that customers increasingly expected a small SUV to be. It was, after all, uncompromisingly rugged, and a loyal band of buyers made it very clear to Suzuki that they wanted it to stay that way. So it has. This Mark IV version, which was launched in late 2018, carries forward the 4 staple Jimny virtues which are needed for serious off-roading: a ladder frame chassis, excellent clearance angles, a 3-link rigid axle suspension and part-time all-grip 4-wheel drive with a low-range transfer box. Which isn't to say that this car hasn't been improved. On the contrary, there's plenty that's different. A new 1.5 litre petrol engine, much greater torsional rigidity, some more modern cabin equipment features, and even a touch incongruously on such a back-to-basics vehicle, a package of camera-driven safety kit. But we're told it fully embodies the spirit of its much-loved predecessors in a way that no other modern SUV can quite replicate. Sounds promising. Time to try it. So let's get this straight. If you've no intention of ever going seriously off-road, don't bother with this Suzuki. You'll hate it within the first mile. The low-speed ride crashes over bumps, the tall, slab-sided shape rolls its way through the bends, and steering turns provide vague hints of directional change rather than meaningful movements. It's all very well for motoring writers who've only had to live for this car for an afternoon to rave about it, but it'd be a very different story if you had to use a Jimny as an only car. But of course, no one ever would. No one who wasn't a farmer or a Hebridean monk anyway. Once you relieve the Suzuki of the need to be all things to all people and accept the Jimny for what it is, this car begins to feel far more comfortable as an automotive proposition. In fact, once you factor in the extra steering play before each corner and accept the fact that harsh acceleration over ripples and bumps will see the Jimny bucking about like a bull at a rodeo, you might actually quite enjoy driving it on a paved surface. That's providing, of course, that you are merely on the way to the kind of terrain that it was actually designed for. Hastening you towards your destination is a bigger engine this time around, a 1.5 litre unit putting out 101 PS, replacing the previous 86 PS 1.3. It's petrol fueled, of course. Suzuki ditched diesel across its model range some time ago, but it still hasn't been fitted with a turbocharger. So there's a weedy 130 Nm torque output, which necessitates frequent use of this long wand-like gear lever as you push up through the various ratios of the 5-speed manual gearbox to the distant orchestral accompaniment of old-school style transmission whine. That is assuming, of course, you haven't taken up the option of paying more for the available automatic variant. To be honest, we can't really see why you would. That box has only 4 speeds, and it only really makes sense in the kind of urban driving that you'd really want to avoid with a Jimny wherever possible. A second, smaller gear stick sits behind this first one, which on this Mark IV model replaces the buttons that activated the 4-wheel drive system on the previous generation car, apparently because for drive systems people prefer levers to switches. And this is your access point to Suzuki's All Grip Pro 4x4 setup, which, if things get a bit greasy, allows you to switch from the usual 2H, 2-wheel drive high setting, to 4H, 4-wheel drive high at speeds of up to 62 miles an hour, as you'd want to do on, say, an icy morning or on a stormy day. It's all you'll need until the time comes to leave a paved surface. Now, once you do, this car, of course, immediately feels much more at home. Had it not been for the SUV revolution over the last decade, Suzuki would probably have had to compromise the off-road orientated element of this model's design to suit the Duke and Capture crowd. But as it is, fashionistas can be fobbed off with a choice of no fewer than 4 other less rugged small models which offer various flavours of 4-wheel drive across the company's range, and that frees up the Jimny to properly serve the Serengeti set. Now, these people will be pleased to find that a proper, tough, ladder-framed chassis has been retained, and that's still a unique feature in the small SUV segment. And this time around, it's fashioned from more robust, high-tensile steel, and it's gained 2 extra cross members. Hence, body frame torsional rigidity is 1.5 times higher than the previous model. That's all foundational to a heavy-duty, rigid axle suspension bolted to this platform, the kind of setup that's now rare to find on 4x4s, even more authentic ones. You'll want to test it out, and that means finding the kind of terrain where selection of the All Grip Pro system's final 4L low-range transfer box will be essential. Amongst affordable SUVs, the Jimny is the only one that isn't a truck which can offer this essential accompaniment to really gnarly off-road progress. Even with 4L engaged on really slippery terrain, you're going to lose traction at some point, and that's the time on a larger purpose-built 4x4 when mechanically locking differentials would intervene to stop individually spinning wheels and maintain forward motion. Unwilling to add in to the Jimny the cost and weight of that kind of setup, Suzuki has instead equipped the car with an electronic traction control system which automatically brakes the spinning wheel to redistribute torque asymmetrically across the axle. It's not a perfect solution for surfaces like polished ice or wet grass, but for rocky, muddy terrain like this, it makes this car feel pretty unstoppable. Now, some of the credit for this also has to go to the 3-link rigid axle coil-sprung suspension arrangement that we mentioned earlier. Now, thanks to this setup, when one wheel is pushed upward by an obstacle, the connected wheel on the other side is pressed downward, and that gives superior grip on uneven surfaces. And if those surfaces are soft, this car's feather-like curb weight will be a huge advantage. Now, it tips the scales at just 1,135 kilos, so it won't sink into light snow or gloopy mud in the way that a larger SUV would, which is why in Iceland, for example, Jimnys are the only SUVs that, with appropriate tyres of course, they can drive across the country's glaciers. Complementing all this are short front and rear overhangs that facilitate a set of off-roading stats that are good enough to better those of a rugged Jeep Wrangler. Specifically, this Suzuki can manage an approach angle of up to 37 degrees, a departure angle of up to 49 degrees, and a breakover angle of up to 28 degrees. Put those figures to the test and you'll appreciate the hill holder braking and the hill descent control systems that have been added into this 4th generation model. And it's 210 mils of available ground clearance, which you would think would be enough to give you a reasonably deep wading capability. Actually, though, it can't go through more than 320 millimetres of water. That is a bit disappointing. Also, rather underwhelming is this car's brake towing capacity figure of 1,300 kilos, and that would fall to just 350 kilos with an unbraked trailer. Thank the feeble torque output for that. There's no anti-trailer sway system offered either. Now, having experienced the Jimny off-road, you'll be more inclined to forgive its shortcomings on it. You'll have realised, for example, that the steering is slow-geared for a reason, because that's exactly how you'd need it to be off a paved surface. An electrically assisted recirculating ball rack has been fitted this time around, and at highway speeds, its slow gearing actually has the effect of making the car feel more stable than it might otherwise be. There aren't many other reasons to be cheerful about driving at or near the legal limit, though, in a Jimny. The 1.5 litre engine thrashes away at such a din that you'll be tempted to line the narrow door pockets here with strips of Nurofen, although at least that does mask the prodigious wind noise that's inevitably generated by this spherical shape. Getting up to speed takes this car well out of its comfort zone too. The lack of a turbocharger really tells here. Tellingly, Suzuki doesn't officially quote a rest to 62 miles an hour sprint time, although it's reckoning to be about 12 seconds. Barn door aerodynamics limit the top speed to just 90 miles an hour, and you'll need to thrash the little engine mercilessly to get anywhere close to either of those readings, and you'll have to be on a super smooth surface that won't cause the car to buck about. Through the corners, you'll quickly discover that the Bridgestone rubber doesn't offer up much grip, so care is definitely needed on damp surfaces, and you'll be squealing around roundabouts even at quite low speeds. Surprisingly though, the steering does offer up a reasonable amount of feedback as to what the front tyres are actually doing, which, along with the agile feel that you get from the short wheelbase format, gives you rather more confidence to push on than you might otherwise expect, should that be absolutely necessary. Now, Suzuki claims to have put a lot of work into improving ride comfort with this 4th generation model, positioning 8 rubber body mounts between the ladder frame chassis and the upper body to try to help dial out the worst vibrations. That is quite effective when it comes to smoothing things out on the highway, but it's not enough to prevent an extremely choppy standard of ride at low speeds, which will shake your teeth out over potholes and sharper speed humps. But all these things are inevitable byproducts of proper off-road prowess. To cure any of the issues that we just mentioned, you'd have to make this car either much more expensive or more compromised for off-road use, which is why we like it exactly as it is, and we think you will too. There's no doubt about it, this is a proper little 4x4, designed more for the mud than the metropolis, with flared wheel arches, bulky side panels and a tailgate mounted spare wheel, all there to reflect its rugged personality. It's an iconic formula. Shrink a Mercedes G-Wagen, a Land Rover Defender or a Jeep Wrangler in a hot wash, and something like what we've got here is pretty much what you get. Now, true, it is perhaps a touch ironic that Suzuki has chosen to modernise this 4th generation Jimny by giving it an unapologetically retro-style look, but the brand's perspective on that is very different. They'll tell you that although people might choose to see this car as a fashionable trinket, everything about the way it's been designed has its roots in practical capability. The upright A-pillars and the flat clamshell bonnet, for example, enhance forward visibility. The flat roof enables easy snow removal in harsh winter conditions, and front fog lights have been built into the corners of the bumper, not as a fashionable feature, but to better light twisting trails at night. Plus, of course, there's plenty of heritage-derived design. Long-standing Jimny cues like round headlights and independent indicators have been carried forward, as have the 5 vertical openings that characterise the front grille. From the side, you'll get more of a feel for the way the dimensions of this car have changed this time around. I mean, heck, it is short. Suzuki's trimmed 30mm from the body length of this 4th generation model, and it measures in at less than 3.5 metres, and it makes this Jimny about the size of a tiny city runabout, intentionally so, to allow this 4x4 in its home market to fit into the Japanese Kai car urban model category. That means it's considerably shorter than more conventional small SUVs, although it is closer to them in terms of width and height, thanks to being 45mm wider and 20mm higher than its predecessor. Now, for once in an SUV, there are big wheel arch extensions that actually serve a practical purpose. They shroud 15-inch wheels that look equally good whether they're supplied in base spec steel form or, as here, as alloy rims. Lower side sill covers protect the body from stone chips, and you even get old-fashioned rain gutters on the roof edges. The front part of the lower side window line dips just before the wing mirror to give better front-forward visibility as you're inching over rocks and boulders. And just in front of that mirror, horizontal-style slashes reference the bonnet cooling slits of the previous model. And at the back, well, unfortunately, Suzuki hasn't copied Jeep in trying to resite this spare wheel so it impinges less on rearward visibility, but the bluff vertical tailgate no longer has its width compromised by tail light clusters. These are now sited within the corner sections of the bumper here. Even the body colours have a practical purpose. Suzuki expects many Jimnys to be specified in kinetic yellow. That's a high visibility shade that's intended to better stand out in bad weather or when the car's in use on work sites. Of course, as usual, what's more important is the stuff that you can't see, namely this model's stiff, sophisticated TECT platform. That's designed around what Suzuki calls total effective control technology. Now, this uses lots of high-strength steel to make the structure very strong, but also low in weight. And that's the main reason why this Jimny weighs so little. 1,135 kilos to be exact. That's about 200 kilos less than the segment norm. So enough on the outside. What's the interior like? Suzuki has, after all, had a couple of decades to redesign it. Not that such a long gestation period was in any way necessary. The cabin of this Jimny, like its predecessors, still needs to be focused around straightforward, down-to-earth practicality, and of course it still is, or at least most of it is. Exposed Allen bolts on the door pulls and on the dashboard grab handle attempt to inject a Jeep-like vibe. The centre stack switchgear looks appropriately modern, and there are smart knurled silver bezels around the corner vents that offer a cursory nod to crossover fashion. Otherwise, though, everything's designed around functionality, with all the fixtures and the fittings unapologetically finished in dark, hard, wipe-clean plastic. What will be less familiar to loyal Jimny folk is this cabin's more spacious feel, and that's thanks to the extra body width, the exceptionally high roof height, and a 14mm increase in the seat hip point. Plus, for tall drivers, it'll also help that the 240mm seat sliding range is 45mm longer than before, which would make it much easier to get comfortable at the wheel, were it not for the fact that Suzuki still hasn't got around to giving the steering column reach adjustment. It only alters for rake. In compensation, though, the seats have been redesigned for extra support. They still don't hold you in place very well when you're cornering at speed on tarmac, but the cushion frames have been made 70mm wider so as to help absorb shocks better when you're driving across rough terrain. For that kind of use, you'll be glad of the way you're seated so high and commandingly. You enjoy superb all-round visibility, courtesy of the boxy shape, and you grasp a 3-spoke leather-stitched steering wheel with intuitive multifunction buttons. Through it you view instruments set in cubic housings with orange on black gauges that are permanently lit for clear viewing on and off-road when the vehicle passes between sunlit and shaded areas. Between the dials here is a small screen showing instant and average fuel economy, driving range, average speed and elapsed driving time. Go for this plusher SZ5 model and you'll find this 7-inch smartphone link infotainment touchscreen rather incongruously pitched in the centre of all this utilitarian plastic. It dominates the centre of the dash and it replaces the simpler CD stereo fitted to the entry-level version. The rather basic graphics seem slightly more in keeping in a Jimny than they do in a more sophisticated S-Cross or Vitara SUV, but we continue to find this setup's lack of physical controller switchgear annoying. Still, once you get over that, you'll enjoy all the functionality that's provided as standard. Now, impressively, satellite navigation is included along with Bluetooth, and you even get the Apple CarPlay and MirrorLink phone connectivity that you really wouldn't expect on such an affordably priced small car. That's just as well, actually, because you might well end up preferring your phone's navigation app in preference to the smartphone link package's rather laggy standard setup. This display doesn't include an audio upgrade. As with the lesser SX4 variant, you're stuck with a Weedy 2 speaker setup, although that does include a DAB tuner. What else? Well, as we suggested, there's nothing much wrong with cabin ergonomics, although we do wish that the door armrests were padded. What is nice, though, is the way that the switchgear and the rotary dials are big enough and easy enough to be operated by a gloved hand. Cabin storage, well, there's not an awful lot of that. The glove box, though, is a decent size and it has a useful ledge just above it. You get ticket clips in the sun visors. There's a trinket tray at the bottom of the centre stack. There's a coin box here by the handbrake, and there are 2 cup holders behind that. Plus, there's a USB port and a 12-volt socket. Okay, time to take a seat in the rear. Now, the front door feels somewhat light and insubstantial, but it is at least big enough to provide a wide aperture for rear bench entry. You'll want a sliding mechanism to pull the seat base frontwards as you pull the backrest forward. Unfortunately, you only get that on the passenger side. Once you're in, there's actually a surprising amount of space given this car's tiny exterior dimensions. There's certainly enough for a couple of adults on shorter trips anyway. There will only be a couple of occupants because only 2 seat belts are provided back here, which might conceivably be annoying for braver family folk prepared to consider this Jimny as a second car. Now, because you're sitting right over the wheel arches, there's no storage to your left or to your right, nor do the side windows open, but the deep glass line gives the cabin an airy feel. Plus, the twin cup holders between the front seats are easily accessible, and because the tailgate is so close to the back of your head, the ceiling-mounted boot lamp can serve as a reading light. It's also nice that the seat backs recline for greater comfort, and you can even specify an optional rear seat USB port. Let's finish with a look at the boot. And now, as usual with the Jimny, there's a side opening tailgate which will create all kinds of awkwardness if you're trying to access the cargo area when you're backed into a tight parking space. Still, it is a feature that you'll soon learn to live with and maybe even to like. Toyota Land Cruiser customers seem to. The exposed wires connecting the heated window element do look a bit naff though. With the tailgate open, you're faced with the stark reality that the tiny overall body length has to cost you somewhere, namely in terms of luggage room. With the rear seat in place, it's virtually non-existent. To be specific, there's just 85 litres on offer. That's less than you'd get in a little Mazda MX-5 sports car. Now, some of it is taken up by this lidded plastic box, but you can lift that out and shove it in the garage if you have no need to store smaller items away from prying eyes. Even once you've done that, though, you'll be hard-pressed to fit more than a couple of shopping carriers or a laptop bag back here. Although, being able to reset the rear seat backrests into a more vertical position certainly helps to free up a few extra inches. Otherwise though, to carry almost any kind of serious load at all, you'll need to fold down the rear seats. Now fortunately they split 50-50, so 3 folk for example would stand a chance of getting their belongings to the airport, and they fold completely flat, at which point a decent 377 litre capacity is opened up. That's 53 litres more than the previous model, and it's about the same as you get in the boot of something like a Volkswagen Golf. Take the headrest off the front passenger seat and you can also fold that almost flat to facilitate the storage of longer items. The backs of the rear seats and the luggage room floor is coated with plastic for easy removal of dirt and stains, and 5 hook points are fitted on each side under the quarter windows, along with 4 luggage hooks around the floor area for flexible use of the luggage space. Plus, laudably, Suzuki also includes a 12-volt socket back here. From launch, Jimny pricing was pitched from around £15,500, and that's the sum necessary to get you into the base SZ4 level of trim that arguably suits this back-to-basics model best. But though that may be the level of spec you need, the trim level you'll want is this plusher SZ5 variant, which from launch was priced from around £18,000. At this level in the range, you have the option of finding an extra £1,000 to get a 4-speed automatic gearbox. And that's it in terms of choice. There is a single fixed top body style, although it would be surprising if Suzuki didn't reprise the success of previous soft top models. And the staple 101 PS 1.5 litre 4-cylinder petrol unit is the only engine option, the brand having abandoned diesel power and having no plans to sell in Europe the tiny 650cc engine that this car can be ordered with back in Japan. When the previous generation model was launched, it had to try to appeal to families as well as farmers, but by the time this Mark IV design arrived in late 2018, Suzuki had plenty of more tarmac-orientated 4x4 and SUV models to appeal to those who want an all-wheel drive model of this type, but who are less interested in conquering the Serengeti. Now, if you're looking at the base spec SZ4 variant, around £500 more would get you a 4-wheel drive version of the company's city car-sized Ignis, and around £1,500 more would get you a 4-wheel drive version of the brand's Swift Super Mini. If you're looking at spending around £18,000 on this plusher SZ5 spec Jimny, around £2,800 more would get you the cheapest 4-wheel drive Vitara, and around £4,800 more would get you the cheapest 4-wheel drive version of the brand's slightly larger SX4 S-Cross SUV. But we might as well be comparing this model against a Range Rover for all the relevance those kinds of comparisons have to likely buyers. If you really want a Jimny, then it's highly unlikely that it'll even cross your mind to buy any other car, either from a Suzuki showroom or from anywhere else. After all, what else do you compare it to? I mean, yes, the same kind of money would buy you a selection of small crossovers at the cheaper end of the Super Mini-derived SUV B segment, so cars like Renault's Captur and Nissan's Duke, but those are models that would be like a fish out of water in this Jimny's typical wild habitat. A Dacia Duster is closer to the mark. That's a car that in base petrol 4x4 form would save you nearly £2,000 on a base spec Jimny, but it does have nothing like the iconic feel of this Suzuki, and it's nothing like as rugged either. The same would also apply to, say, Ssangyong Corando, except for the fact that one of those wouldn't actually save you very much. We think a closer match to the kind of car that this Jimny is can be found with the Fiat Panda 4x4. That's a model that's light, fun, surprisingly capable, and which can be had in petrol form for around £15,500 and in more SUV-like diesel cross-spec for around £18,500. But the Fiat, like the Duster and the Corando, lacks this Jimny's low-range gearbox, which of course you'll need for serious off-road use. For that, in a 3-door SUV, you'll have to pay, well, nearly 3 times as much for something like a short wheelbase version of the Toyota Land Cruiser, the Jeep Wrangler, or the Land Rover Defender. Now, true, you could get a pickup with 4x4 and low-range transmission for closer to the kind of money that's being asked here, but you'd still be looking at needing to find, well, £5,000 to £6,000 more than you'd have to pay for this Suzuki, and you'd get yourself a vehicle that would be far heavier and much less manoeuvrable too. No, basically what we've got here is a Mercedes G-Wagen, a Jeep Wrangler or a Hummer shrunk down to smaller size and relieved of all the things you don't really require for ultimate off-road prowess. Now true, all those cars have more sophisticated four-wheel drive mechanicals to get them through the glop, but thanks to its featherlight weight, that's kit that this Jimny really doesn't need. In an ideal world, assuming that you weren't a farmer or a National Trust Ranger, it'd be a cherished second or third car, a fun purchase like an affordable little roadster that you kept in the corner of the garage for high days and holidays, except that the playground here will be Ben Nevis rather than Brands Hatch. Brilliant. Ultimately, if you like all the things a Jimny tries to be, you'll probably find yourself looking for excuses to buy it, in which case you're going to want to know just how generous Suzuki has been with the standard spec. Now, as you'd expect, both trim levels give you the brand's All Grip Pro four-wheel drive part-time system and a proper full-size spare wheel. Plus, with this fourth generation model, you'll also get hill hold control and hill descent control too. What you might be rather surprised to find, though, is that even the base SZ4 version includes niceties like air conditioning, front fog lamps, auto headlights, cruise control, a DAB digital radio and Bluetooth connectivity with a USB port. And it even had camera-driven features like autonomous braking and high beam assist. At this level of the range, you'll get 15-inch black steel wheels. And if you still have a stash of old plastic discs that you like to play, you might also be interested to know that you have to have SZ4 spec if you want to roll back the years and use a CD player. Despite all of that, Suzuki still expects a majority of Jimny buyers to prefer the plusher SZ5 variant we're trying here, and for sure you would be tempted if the extra £2,500 wasn't too much of a stumbling block. The extra cash gets you LED headlights with washers and a Sparta look, courtesy of 15-inch alloy wheels, rear privacy glass and body-coloured door handles. Inside there's a leather-coloured steering wheel, heated front seats, climate control and the brand's smartphone link infotainment system with its 7-inch colour touchscreen. This includes navigation and smartphone mirroring using the Apple CarPlay and Android Auto systems. Bear in mind that you'll need SZ5 trim if you want the more eye-catching colours that can now be had with this car. The popular kinetic yellow finish, for example, and that's a shade apparently mixed to reflect the colour of a safety vest. And now this comes as part of one of the brand's dual-tone colour packages, which mean that your chosen colour, either chiffon ivory pearl metallic, or as in this case, brisk blue metallic, will come with this bluish black pearl metallic roof. If you're not all that bothered about the contrasting top, or you've just limited yourself to SZ4 spec, then you'll be choosing between superior white, silky silver metallic, or bluish black pearl metallic. Talking of options, let's take a look at the extra features you can add, and let's start, as is appropriate here, with the practical stuff. You can of course specify a tow bar. It's possible to add a rear skid plate, and there are various roof appendages. There's a multi-roof rack, a roof load basket and even a surfboard carrier module. Or you can have a tow bar mounted bike carrier. You might want a set of mud flaps, a rain and wind deflector set and the usual rubber floor mats. For the boot, you can have a cargo tray, a flexible trunk liner, a full load area liner or a cargo partition grid. For the back pews, there's a rear seat protective cover, a sunshade set and even an extra USB port. As for personalisation options, well, you can get a front grille branded with full Suzuki script, silver front bumper trim and a side sill lower trimming set. Plus there's special escutcheon trim for the door handles and a selection of smarter cases for the tailgate mounted spare wheel. For the cabin, you can get a trim surround for the infotainment screen, a smarter gear knob, plus a cigarette lighter and an ashtray if you haven't kicked the habit yet. That's enough on that. What about safety? Well, we've already mentioned the surprising standard inclusion of high beam assist and autonomous braking across the range, the latter setup being Suzuki's DSBS, dual sensor brake support package. And this works using stereo cameras mounted either side of the interior rear view mirror that also deliver two other key features, lane departure warning and a weaving alert function. In case you're not familiar with these three technology features, we'll quickly cover them. Dual sensor brake support works as you drive, scanning the road ahead in search of potential collision hazards. If the system detects one, it'll alert you with visual and audible warnings. Should you then not respond, the brakes will be applied to decrease the severity of any resulting accident if it can't be avoided altogether. Lane departure warning and the weaving alert function are both activated at speeds of over 37 miles an hour, and they're there purely to warn you, or with a steering wheel vibration if you've deviated over lane markings, or with an instrument display warning flash if you're weaving perhaps through drowsiness within your carriageway. Suzuki also wants to emphasise that one of the advantages of this car's TECT, or Total Effective Control Technology chassis, is the way that it disperses collision force energy more efficiently, considerably improving crash safety. In addition, as you'd expect in this day and age, both Jimny models have ABS anti-lock brakes, ESP stability control, and the brake assist function for emergency stops that see the rear lights flashing under heavy braking. There's also a tyre pressure monitoring system, along with twin front, side and curtain airbags, plus there are two ISOFIX child seat mounts in the rear bench there. Now, you would have thought that that would virtually guarantee this car a strong showing in Euro NCAP safety testing. Surprisingly, though, didn't turn out that way when NCAP got their hands on a Mark IV Jimny model. Though the organisation did award this Suzuki high marks for both adult and child protection, it achieved respective scores of 73 and 84% in those crucial areas. It scored poorly in the pedestrian protection category, just 52%, although that was perhaps predictable given this uncompromisingly spherical shape. You would have thought that all the standard camera-driven safety kit might have compensated for that to some extent, but Euro NCAP also apparently noted a poor driver's airbag performance, potential head restraint issues, and rather less than stellar rear passenger side protection. As a result, this car was awarded just 3 stars out of a possible 5. Now, to be fair, this model's closest rival, the Dacia Duster, also only delivered a 3-star showing, and it achieved lower scores than the Jimny in every category save that for pedestrian protection. The light 1135 kilo curb weight that helps this Jimny so much off-road ought also to propel it to an eye-catching set of efficiency stats. That was what we expected anyway, but the official figures don't really suggest that. Now, before we get to those, let's make the point that this model's fuel economy readings have been measured according to the latest, stricter WLTP, that's World Harmonised Light Vehicle Test Procedure rating cycle, but the emission stats, which Suzuki has provided for us, to quote, have been converted back to the older New European driving cycle NEDC 2 spec, since that's what a lot of rival models are still using. For this manual model, you're talking up to 35.8 mpg on the combined cycle and 154 grams per kilometre of CO2. For the automatic, the readings are up to 32.2 mpg on the combined cycle and 170 grams per kilometre. Even a Dacia Duster does quite a lot better than that, and a larger and heavier petrol 4x4 SUV from the next class up, say a Volkswagen Tiguan 1.4 litre TSI 4Motion, can beat those figures by around 15% or more. The reasons why probably have a lot to do with the efficiency drain of the All Grip Pro 4-wheel drive system and the fact that this Suzuki's 1.5 litre engine lacks a turbocharger. As a result, it has to spin away at a fiercely high speed all the time any kind of meaningful forward motion is required. And predictably, when you go off-road, things deteriorate further. A full-on mud plugging session will probably see your fuel economy drop well into the 20s. What about other costs? Well, there's the usual Suzuki 3-year, 60,000 mile warranty. The brand maybe needs to think about extending that to match rivals who are now offering 4, 5 or even 7-year deals. There is also a year's breakdown cover that extends across the whole of Europe and includes roadside recovery. Now you can extend this yourself at extra cost via an arrangement with your dealer. A 12-year anti-rust guarantee comes with the car too. Service stops are needed every year or 12,500 miles, and once your Jimny's been registered for 3 years, it'll become eligible for Suzuki's fixed price service package, which will enable you to get servicing carried out for a single fixed price, which will include parts, labour and VAT. There are around 180 Suzuki dealers in the UK, and they're noted for excellent customer service. You can also even out the cost of regular maintenance with a service payment plan that covers you for anything between 1 and 3 garage visits. Unfortunately though, insurance isn't especially cheap. It's rated at 13D for the SZ4 and 14D for this SZ5, and that's despite all this car's advanced camera-driven safety systems. Sometimes you really do wonder what planet the insurance industry lives on. Compensation can be found in the form of exceptionally good residual values though. After 3 years and 60,000 miles, independent experts reckon that this car should still be worth 51% of what you originally paid for it. You could call this car a lot of things. Over half a century of production, Suzuki certainly has. In that time, it's not only been known as the LJ and the SJ series, but it's also worn badges as diverse as Samurai, Gypsy, Sierra and Farm Worker. It's even occasionally been completely rebranded as a Mazda and a Maruti. And along the way, it's been often in 194 countries, clocking up over 2.85 million sales. However this model has been marketed though, its cheeky, chunky character has remained the same. The Jimny always has been one of a kind. Which makes any fresh chapter in this story a significant event. Loyal buyers worried that Suzuki might have compromised this model's legendary off-road ability in search of crossover conformity can rest easy. If anything, that's been enhanced. And the featherlight curb weight continues to mean that this car can get to places that larger, more sophisticated 4x4s simply couldn't access. Of course, that kind of capability means you'll need to be understanding of the Jimny's limitations on tarmac. In fact, unless you're a particularly hardy type or you happen to live on the slopes of a mountain, we'd go as far as to say that it's completely unsuitable as an only car. Not only because it bounces about on a paved surface and it steers so vaguely, but also because of its interior limitations. The fact that, for example, you can either have a decently sized boot or 4 seats, but not both. Now, none of this would really matter, though, if the Suzuki were bought as a second car for country dwellers or as a weekend off-road plaything. For that kind of remit, we think it'd be just about perfect. And in summary, well, it certainly helps that this time around the Jimny doesn't have to try to simultaneously appeal to families as well as farmers in the way that previous versions tried and failed to do. These days, Suzuki has a whole portfolio of more tarmac-orientated SUVs if you'd like four-wheel drive, but you need a less agricultural feel on tarmac. But these won't give you the live axles, the low-range gearing, and the sort of rough road readiness that this car offers. Nothing else remotely near this Jimny's price point does. It's authentic, it's classless, and for loyal buyers, it represents everything a small 4x4 ought to be.